The jungle did not care that a ship had just fallen out of the sky. It kept making its sounds, the low hum of something large moving through the canopy above, the wet drip of moisture off leaves the size of barn doors, the distant call of a creature that had no name in any human record. The jungle of Veldra 9 simply continued, the way old things do, unbothered by the arrival of metal and fire and the smell of burning fuel spreading slowly through the trees. Darren Cole was flat on his back in a shallow stream when he opened his eyes. He did not move right away. He had learned, during 6 years of working in places where the ground itself could be dangerous, that the first few seconds after a bad fall were for listening, not moving. He listened. Water moved around his legs. Something clicked steadily in the trees to his right. His own breathing was too fast, and he made himself slow it down before he did anything else. He was alive. That was the first fact. He catalogued the rest carefully. His left arm worked. His right shoulder ached badly, but the arm moved when he told it to. Both legs responded. There was a cut above his left eye that was sending a thin line of blood down his temple, and when he raised his hand to it, his fingers came away red, but not alarmed red. Scalp wounds bled a lot and meant very little. He knew this. He sat up. The stream around him was shallow and clear, running over smooth dark stones that looked almost purple in the strange light. Veldra 9 orbited a gas giant, and the gas giant in turn orbited one of 2 stars in this binary system, which meant the light here was never quite the same color twice. Right now it was a deep amber, filtering through the enormous canopy above him in long tilted columns, and it made everything look like the inside of a lantern. He found his survival pack 15 meters upstream, snagged on a root. The pack had taken damage, but it had not opened, which meant most of what was inside was still intact. He inventoried carefully: 4 emergency ration blocks, a water filter, cracked but usable, a glow stick, half depleted. A small handheld scanner that turned on when he pressed the button, but showed only a fragmented display, which was worse than useless if it gave him bad data and better than nothing if it gave him anything at all. A sidearm with a charge indicator reading 42%. A thermal blanket folded tight, a comm unit. He tried the comm first. There was static. Then, through the static, Commander Reaver's voice, rough and strained but present. "Cole, tell me you are alive." "Alive," he said. "Stream, jungle, not sure how far from the ship." "The ship is gone, Cole." A pause. He could hear other voices behind hers, movement, the sound of someone coughing hard. "The forward section is in pieces. We have the aft module mostly intact. 15 of us. I need you to move toward the emergency beacon. I am broadcasting on the standard channel, but the signal is weak. Do you have your scanner?" "Damaged. I will figure it out." "Move carefully. The fauna here is not catalogued. We do not know what is dangerous." "Understood." He clipped the comm to his pack strap and stood up slowly, letting his legs carry his weight and checking that they were willing to do it. They were. He was lucky and he knew it, and he filed that knowledge away without celebrating it, because celebrating luck early was how people got foolish. He moved through the jungle for the better part of 2 hours, following the slope of the land, the direction of the water, and the occasional fragmented ping from the scanner that suggested the beacon was generally east and slightly elevated. The jungle was dense, but not impassable. The trees were enormous, trunks wider than cargo containers, roots that rose from the ground like the ribs of something buried, but the floor between them was clear enough, covered in a thick carpet of low blue-green growth that compressed softly underfoot. He saw 3 animals during those 2 hours. The first was small and fast and vanished before he could focus on it. The second was high in the canopy, too far up to read. The third stopped him cold. It was the size of a large horse, low to the ground, with 6 legs arranged in 2 rows and a flat angular head that swung slowly in his direction when he stepped into its line of sight. He went completely still. It regarded him for a long moment. Then it turned and walked into the trees without hurrying. He exhaled. He found the hollow by accident. He had stepped around the base of a ridge, a long shelf of dark stone rising out of the jungle floor, overgrown on its upper face with something that glowed faintly gold, and the ground on the other side dropped away into a natural depression, maybe 8 meters wide and 4 deep, sheltered on 3 sides by the ridge itself and on the fourth by a dense wall of root growth. The depression was dry. The air inside it was warmer than the surrounding jungle, which meant something in the rock was holding heat. It was, structurally, an almost perfect shelter. He noticed all of that in the first second. In the second, he noticed the nest. It was built against the back wall of the hollow, where the ridge curved inward and created a natural overhang. The materials were layered, branches first, then something fibrous, then softer growth arranged in a shallow bowl shape. It was large. Whatever had built it was not small. In the nest were 3 creatures. They were scaled. The scales were small and tight, covering everything including the small folded wings pressed against their backs. They had 4 eyes each, arranged in a slight arc, and the eyes were open and watching him with an intensity that seemed too focused for anything that small. The largest one was perhaps the size of a medium dog. The other 2 were smaller. They were breathing quickly, and as he watched, the largest one spread its wings slightly, not fully, just enough, and made a sound in the back of its throat that was somewhere between a hiss and a whistle. Darren did not move. He held very still, and he breathed slowly, and he looked at them without staring directly into their eyes, which was a rule he applied to most animals he did not know, because direct eye contact at close range read as aggression in more species than not. He reached for his scanner slowly and aimed it at the nest. The display flickered. Most of the readings were garbage, but one line came through clearly before the screen went dark entirely and refused to come back. Neural Complexity Index, beyond standard scale. He stood there in the warmth of the hollow and looked at 3 small creatures that were alone and afraid and apparently possessed of minds that his scanner could not fully measure, and he thought about Commander Reaver telling him to move toward the beacon. He looked at the hollow entrance. He looked at the nest. He set his pack down, lowered himself slowly to the ground, and sat with his back against the hollow wall, a careful distance from the nest, close enough to be present and far enough to not be a threat. The largest hatchling watched him. He said quietly, "I am not going to hurt you." He did not know if that meant anything to them. He said it anyway because the alternative was silence, and silence right now felt like the wrong choice. He stayed. Trust in most species is built in the same direction as water, slowly, downhill, finding the path of least resistance. Darren had catalogued 17 non-human species in 6 years of fieldwork. He had observed nest behaviors, feeding behaviors, territorial displays, and 3 different kinds of distress signals that no one had identified before him. He understood, on a level that went past training and into something closer to instinct, that trust between a foreign creature and a frightened one was not built by being impressive. It was built by being consistent, by being present, by not being a threat long enough that the animal eventually stopped spending energy expecting one. He settled in for the long version of that process. He did not try to approach the nest on that first evening. He sat against the hollow wall at a distance he judged as non-threatening, ate half of a ration block in slow, careful movements, and watched the 3 hatchlings watch him. The largest one, Red, he had started calling it in his head, for the faint reddish undertone in its dark scales stayed at the front of the nest, and did not take its 4 eyes off him for more than a few seconds at a time. The middle one, Gray, paler in color, with a more angular head, watched him from behind Red with the focused stillness of something that was thinking hard. The smallest one, Still, barely moved at all. It sat at the back of the nest, nearly motionless, and observed everything with an expression that Darren could only describe as patience. They did not eat while he was awake. He noticed this. He suspected they had a food source somewhere in or near the hollow. Perhaps the mother had been leaving provisions, or they were capable of short foraging runs, but they were not going to reveal that to him yet. He slept in short intervals, waking every hour or so to listen. The jungle at night on Veldra 9 was loud in a completely different way than the jungle during the day. The daytime sounds were steady and ambient. The nighttime sounds were specific and directional, which was worse, because specific and directional meant something was choosing to be somewhere. On the second day, he found a narrow channel in the hollow floor where water collected from a seep in the rock. He tested it with his filter and drank carefully. He set up basic perimeter markers using stripped vines and pieces of reflective material from his pack, nothing that would stop a serious predator, but enough to give him a second of warning. He talked to them while he worked. Not constantly, not in a way that was meant to convey anything specific, just steady, calm speech, the way you might talk to yourself while doing a task, letting the sound of a human voice become part of the background of the hollow rather than something alarming. Red hissed at him 4 times on the second day. Each time, Darren stopped moving, waited, and then continued whatever he was doing at a slightly slower pace. Gray tracked every movement he made, still watched from the back of the nest, and did not hiss once. On the third night, something found the hollow. Darren heard it first, a low scraping sound at the hollow entrance, then the particular quality of silence that falls when the ambient jungle noise stops, because every living thing in the area has registered a predator's presence. He was on his feet before he was fully awake, sidearm in hand, moving quietly to the hollow entrance. It was big, he could not see all of it in the darkness, only the shape of it against the faint bioluminescent glow of the surrounding plant life. 6 limbs, low body, wide stance, a flat head with eyes that caught the light and threw it back. It was investigating the hollow entrance with a careful slowness that suggested it was experienced. It had done this before. It knew how to test an entrance before committing. Darren stepped forward into the entrance and made himself as large as he could, and fired 2 shots from the sidearm into the ground directly in front of the predator. The sound was enormous in the hollow, light and heat and noise all at once. The predator lurched back and scrambled into the trees with a sound like splintering wood. Behind him, all 3 hatchlings were making noise, sharp clicking sounds, wings partly spread. He turned and held up his empty hand toward them, palm out, and said quietly and clearly, "It is gone. It is gone now." He did not know if that helped. He said it anyway. He sat back down at the hollow entrance with his back to the opening, so he was facing the nest, and he stayed there for the rest of the night. In the morning, his sidearm showed 14% charge remaining. He radioed Commander Reva. She had found the rest of the crew. 12 of the 15 had made it to the aft module. 2 were injured but stable. 1 was still unaccounted for. Search was ongoing. Reva asked about his status, and he reported honestly. Food low, scanner dead, sidearm nearly out, otherwise functional. Then she asked about the nest. He told her. There was a pause that lasted long enough to be significant. "Cole," she said carefully, "the extraction point is approximately 4 kilometers northeast of your position. We will have a path cleared in 2 days. The fauna situation is manageable with the equipment we have from the module." "I understand," he said. "These creatures, you said the scanner gave you a reading before it died. Neural complexity beyond standard scale. That was the exact output." Another pause. That could mean a lot of things from a damaged scanner. "It could," he agreed. "But you are not leaving." "They are alone. Something happened to the mother. I do not know what. But she built this nest, and she did not leave them willingly. I am not willing to leave them either." He heard Reva exhale slowly. "I will push extraction by 48 hours, if the mother has not returned by then. Then we will figure out the next step when we get there." She said something under her breath that he did not quite catch. Then, "Stay safe, Cole." "Doing my best." He put the comm away and looked at the nest. Gray was at the front of the nest now, standing where Red usually stood. Its head was tilted slightly to one side, both pairs of eyes focused on him. It had come forward while he was on the comm without him noticing. He held very still. Gray took 1 step toward him, then another. Then it stretched its neck forward and pressed its small flat nose against his outstretched hand and breathed in deeply. He did not move. It stood there for a full 10 seconds, taking in whatever information a Veldrak hatchling gathered from scent, then stepped calmly back to the nest and settled beside Red, who had watched the whole process with what Darren could only describe as skepticism. He let out a slow breath. On the fourth day, he began to notice things about the hollow that he had missed in the first exhausted hours. The claw marks on the back wall were not the hatchlings. They were far too large, spaced too widely. The materials at the base of the nest included branches from trees he could not see from the hollow entrance, which meant they had been carried some distance. And in the corner of the depression, half covered by drifted leaf matter, was the remains of a previous nest, older, larger, long abandoned. This place had been used before, for a long time. The mother had not chosen this spot randomly. She had brought her young here deliberately to a place she knew, a place that had kept things safe before. Something had taken her away from that plan. Something had interrupted her. He looked at the claw marks on the wall. He looked at the three small creatures in the nest. He looked at the hollow entrance where the jungle waited, patient and enormous and indifferent. He began, carefully and methodically, to make the hollow more defensible. He worked slowly so as not to alarm the hatchlings. He worked steadily because that was the only other option. By the end of the fourth day, when he sat back against the wall with his second-to-last ration block and Red, came forward to the nest edge and looked at him without hissing for the first time, he thought about what the scanner had said. Beyond standard scale. He looked at Red, looking at him. Yeah, he said quietly, I think I knew that already. 400 meters above the wreckage of the Ardent Star, a ship that did not belong in this system dropped out of faster-than-light travel and began slowing into orbit. It was a Durrani patrol vessel, long and narrow in the way that Durrani ships always were, built by a species that thought of space travel the way humans thought of rivers, something you moved along carefully, with respect, because it did not care whether you survived the journey. The ship was called the Sorath's Measure, named after the admiral who commanded it, which was a Durrani tradition and also, incidentally, a source of mild discomfort to the admiral himself, who found namming things after living people to be a habit with poor odds. Admiral Sorath had been in service for 411 years. He was old even by Durrani standards, and Durrani lived a very long time. He had the look of something that had been refined by pressure over decades, not worn down, but compressed, made denser. He stood at the forward observation post in the quiet way that very old people stand when they have learned that stillness conserves more than it costs. His adjutant, Sub-Officer Hale, was young by any measure and moved with the barely suppressed energy of someone who had not yet learned that lesson. He was the one who flagged the distress signal. Human vessel, Hale said, reading from his display. Survey class, crash landing, Veldra 9 surface. Beacon has been active for 4 standard days. Signal is weak. Multiple survivors in the aft module. He paused. Admiral, Veldra 9. I heard you, Sorath said. The protected designation. I know the designation, Hale. I helped write it. Sorath moved toward the communications post with measured steps. Raise the survivor module, standard hailing frequency for human vessels. Commander Reva's voice came through with the particular texture of someone who had not slept well in 4 days, but was not going to admit it. She identified herself, her crew count, their status, and then stopped and waited because she was good at waiting. Sorath introduced himself. He told her the name of his vessel and his rank. Then, because there was no way to say the next part that was not blunt, he said, Commander, your crash site is within the protected zone of a species under Galactic Union Conservation Order. Veldra 9 is a designated nesting ground. Our presence here, and yours, carries significant legal weight. I need to understand your situation completely before I can determine how to proceed. There was a short pause on Reva's end. Then she said, How familiar are you with the Veldrak? Sorath looked at Hale, who had gone very still. Quite familiar, Sorath said. They are among the oldest living species in this region of the galaxy, extremely few in number. The Union has had conservation orders in place for this moon for over 2 centuries. Disturbing a nest site, approaching a nesting female, or removing or harming the young carries the highest level of legal consequence the Union applies to biological protection cases. He paused. Why are you asking? Reva told him. She told it plainly and in order. The crash, the separation, the xenobiologist who had gone missing, the contact 4 days ago, the nest, the 3 hatchlings, the missing mother. She told him about the predator on the 3rd night. She told him about the sidearm charge. She told him about Darren's last communication, which had been 6 hours ago, during which he had reported that one of the hatchlings had approached him voluntarily and that the defenses on the hollow were holding. By the time she finished, the bridge of the Sorath's measure was very quiet. Hale spoke first, in the Durrani language, low enough that it might have been meant only for himself. The phrase he used was an old one, something between an expression of disbelief and an expression used for things that fell outside normal categories. Sorath understood it and did not correct him. Your man, Sorath said carefully, has been inside a Veldrak nest alone for 4 days. Yes, caring for the young. Yes, without authorization, without union guidance, without any protocol for cross-species interaction with a protected species of this classification. Reva's voice was perfectly level when she answered. He did not need authorization to stay with 3 frightened young creatures that had been left alone. He made that decision himself, and I support it. Sorath was quiet for a moment. He turned and looked at Hale. Hale looked back at him with an expression that, in a younger officer, might have been called bewildered. Commander, Sorath said, I need to tell you something about the Veldrak that may not be in your standard reference materials, because it has not been widely shared outside Union scientific circles. He settled his weight slightly, the way he did when he was about to say something he wanted to be sure was heard correctly. The Veldrak are not simply large predators. They possess long memory, generational memory, encoded biologically. What their young experience in the nest, particularly during the early development period, shapes not just individual behavior, but the biological record that gets passed to their own offspring. What happens to those 3 hatchlings now matters in ways that extend far beyond this individual generation. Another pause from Reva's end. What does that mean for Darren? It means, Sorath said, that your man is not just keeping 3 young animals alive. He is shaping what those animals will remember about humans for generations. He paused again. And it means that if the mother returns and reads fear or harm in her young, there will be very little any of us can do about what happens next. And if she reads something else? Sorath did not answer immediately. He looked at the surface of Veldra 9 below through the observation port, the heavy cloud cover, the dark green mass of the jungle, the one bright point where the aft module's emergency lights still burned. Somewhere under all of that was a human sitting in the dark, next to a nest of creatures he had no reason to protect, doing it anyway. We have sensors aboard this vessel that can reach the surface without disturbing anything, he said at last. I would like to deploy one near the hollow, passively, just to watch. I will pass that to Cole, Reva said. He should know. Tell him to ignore it entirely, Sorath said. Tell him to keep doing exactly what he has been doing. I want to see what that looks like. He turned away from the comm and spoke to Hale quietly. Deploy a Class 4 passive drone, low altitude, minimal thermal signature. I want full feed to this bridge. Hale moved to comply. He stopped halfway and turned. Admiral, the mother, we have no current location for her. No, Sorath said, but we know what happened. He brought up the nav record on a secondary display, a logged intercept from 3 days before their arrival. An automated mining drone, decommissioned class, running on corrupted pathfinding. It had strayed into the protected zone. Union records showed it had been intercepted and redirected, but the force required to redirect something that size would not have left the intercepting creature undamaged. She went out to protect this moon from that drone, Hale said slowly. She went out to protect her young, Sorath corrected, and then she could not get back to them, and in her absence, a human decided to stay. He looked at the surface again. Deploy the drone, Hale, quietly. Hale deployed it. The feed came online 11 minutes later. The hollow was small on the screen, a dark space under a rock shelf, with the warm glow of the nest visible in the center and a single human-shaped form sitting against the wall near the entrance, still and steady in the dark. As they watched, the smallest hatchling moved across the nest and settled against the human's side. The human did not move, did not reach for it, did not make any sudden gestures, just sat there and let it happen. Hale stared at the screen for a long time. Then he said, very quietly in Standard, so that the human comm channel could not possibly miss it, "What kind of species does that?" Sorath watched the screen. He watched a human being sit perfectly still in a dark hollow on an alien moon, holding a creature he had no obligation to hold, in a situation he had every right to walk away from. "A very strange one," he said. He did not say it as an insult. He was not sure he had a word, in any language he knew, for what it actually was. There are nights that feel like they are testing something. Not the body specifically. The body knows how to be cold and tired. The body has systems for that. What gets tested in the deep part of a very long night is the part underneath the body, the part that makes decisions about what is worth staying for and what is not. Veldra 9's night cycle ran for 29 standard hours. Darren had known this from the survey briefing before the crash. He had noted it the way you noted things that were interesting in a file and would matter later. Now it mattered. The light faded in the late afternoon in a way that was almost beautiful, the amber going to copper going to a deep bruised purple, and then it was simply dark, and the dark lasted a very long time. He had 2 glow sticks. He used neither of them. Light in the dark was a signal, and a signal attracted attention, and attention right now was the last thing he wanted. He sat in the hollow and let his eyes adjust, and found that the bioluminescent growth on the ridge above the hollow threw just enough cold blue-green light into the depression that he could see the nest, and the 3 shapes in it, and the hollow entrance. That was enough. He ate his last ration block at the start of the night. He saved a quarter of it deliberately, wrapping the remainder and putting it back in his pack with the care of someone who knew the next supply was not coming for a while. His stomach registered its displeasure, and he told it, internally, to be patient. The comm crackled around the 3rd hour of the night. It was Sub-Officer Hale, who had apparently been given the task of maintaining contact from the Union vessel. Hale had good, standard, careful, and slightly formal in the way of someone who had learned a language from text rather than conversation, but completely clear. Human Darren Cole, I wanted to inform you that the mother's last known position places her approximately 80 kilometers south of your location. She is injured but mobile. She is moving. The estimated arrival at the nest site, given her current pace, is 14 hours from now. Darren processed this. She is coming back. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Is she badly hurt? A brief pause. Yes, one wing membrane is significantly torn. She sustained other damage as well. She should not be mobile at all, given the injuries, but she is. Another pause, shorter. She has been moving toward this hollow since the night she was injured. She has not stopped. Darren looked at the nest. Red and grey were pressed together for warmth. Still was awake, as Still often was at night, sitting very upright and very still, and watching the entrance with those 4 dark eyes. She has been trying to get back to them this whole time, he said. Yes. He thought about that. An enormous creature, badly injured, moving through a hostile jungle for 4 days straight without stopping, because her young were here and she could not stop. She sounds like she has a lot in common with a lot of parents I have met, he said. Hale did not respond immediately. When he did, his voice had something in it that was not quite what it had been before. I will update you when we have new position data. The drone feed is good. You should know that Admiral Sorath has been watching. Good, Darren said simply. Then he knows what is happening here. He does, Hale said. He has been watching for some time. The comm went quiet. Around the 6th hour, the predators came back. Not the same one as the 3rd night, or not only that one. There were several of them this time, and they were the smaller kind, the scavenger-class animals that moved in groups and found their courage in numbers. He heard them before he saw them, a dry scratching at the hollow entrance, followed by the specific silence of the jungle when something is hunting. He could not fire the sidearm, one shot left. He was not going to spend it on scavengers. He stood up, moved to the hollow entrance, and made noise. He shouted. He banged his empty canteen against the rock wall. He threw small stones into the darkness at the entrance and kept making noise and kept moving, making himself as large and as loud and as unpredictable as he could. He did this for 4 minutes, which felt like much longer, and then the sounds outside changed, and he knew they were backing off. He sat back down. His hands were shaking slightly. He laced his fingers together and held them still and breathed until they stopped. Red made a sound from the nest, not a hiss, not the warning click he had come to recognize, something lower, something that did not have aggression in it. He looked over. Red was watching him, not with the front of nest guard posture, just watching. "It is all right," Darren said. "They are gone." He did not know if that was true for long. He suspected they would come back. They usually did with that kind of animal. He began talking. He did it partly to stay awake and partly because the silence of the hollow in the deep part of the night had a weight to it that was hard to carry alone. He talked about his sister, who worked in a coastal research station on Earth's northern continent and who had once sent him a message that said simply, "I hope whatever you are looking at out there is worth the distance," and whom he had never quite answered properly. He talked about the first time he had catalogued a new species, a small amphibious creature on a water moon that had 3 life stages, each of which looked completely different from the others, so that the previous survey team had logged them as 3 separate animals. He talked about why he had become a xenobiologist, which was not a dramatic reason. It was just that he had always been more curious about what was out there than what was already known, and careers had been built on lesser foundations. He talked about what it felt like to be very far from home in the dark. At the 8th hour, still crossed the hollow floor. It did not hurry. It moved the way it did everything, deliberately, one careful placement of each small foot at a time, 4 eyes forward. It crossed the space between the nest and Darren, which was perhaps 3 meters, and when it reached him, it stopped and looked at him for a moment, and then simply climbed onto his lap, and settled there with the air of something that had made a decision and was not uncertain about it. He went completely still. Still weighed very little, less than he had expected, given the density of those small scales. It was warm, much warmer than he expected, radiating heat the way the rocks of the hollow radiated heat. It settled with its chin resting on its front feet and its 4 eyes half closed, and it breathed slowly and did not move again. Darren sat there with his hands at his sides and his back against the hollow wall and an alien creature on his lap, and he thought about what Sorath had said, relayed by Reva, about long memory and what the young experienced in the nest. He hoped, with the specific kind of hope that does not ask for much, that what still would remember was this: warmth, stillness, someone choosing to be here. He stayed awake. He kept his hands quiet and his breathing even, and he watched the hollow entrance, and he let the long night pass around him the way water passes around something that has decided not to move. At the 14th hour, the first light came. It came the same way the darkness had, gradually, in colors, purple to copper to amber. The jungle outside began to make its sounds again. The predators did not come back that night. When the light was full enough to see clearly, he looked down at Still, who was still on his lap, still and warm and breathing. He looked up at the hollow entrance. 14 hours, Hale had said. He looked at his hands. He looked at the nest, where Red and Gray had woken and were watching him with the focused attention they always brought to his movements. 14 hours, he said to no one in particular, or possibly to all of them. He straightened his back against the wall and settled in for the wait. The jungle went quiet first. Not gradually, the way it had during the night when the scavengers were probing the entrance. All at once, as if every living thing that had a voice had taken a breath at the same time and simply decided not to let it out. The birds in the canopy stopped. The ambient hum of insects ceased. Even the slow drip of water from the ridge above the hollow seemed to pause, though that was probably Darren's perception rather than reality. the entire world got small and very still. Red heard it before he did. The largest hatchling went to the very front of the nest and stood there with its wings half spread and its 4 eyes fixed on the hollow entrance with an intensity that was beyond alertness. It was recognition. Gray moved to Red's side. Still, who had returned to the nest sometime in the late morning, was upright and motionless at the back. Darren was already on his feet. He had been preparing for this in the hours since Hale's last update, which had put the mother 2 kilometers out and moving with purpose. He had thought carefully about what the next few minutes would look like and what his role in them should be. He had thought about what Sorath's team had told Reva and what Reva had relayed to him about how a wounded Veldrak returning to her nest would process what she found. He had thought about the sidearm, still in his pack at 14% charge, and what carrying it visibly would communicate. He had taken it out and set it carefully against the hollow wall, half behind a rock, where it was not the first thing a very large predator's eyes would find when she came through the entrance. He positioned himself to the left side of the hollow, away from both the entrance and the nest, leaving a clear path between the two. Then he waited. He heard her before he saw her, a sound he did not have a reference for, not quite a footfall, because something that large moving through undergrowth did not step so much as displace. The sound of the jungle not getting out of the way fast enough. Then a shadow at the hollow entrance, bigger than the entrance had looked before, and then she was there. She was much larger than anything he had prepared himself for. The records on the Veldrak had measurements. He had reviewed them during the hours of waiting, borrowing Hale's uplink to cross-reference what the Union files said. The measurements had been accurate in the way that knowing the dimensions of a storm is accurate, technically correct, and completely insufficient as preparation for being inside one. She filled the entrance of the hollow and then kept coming, folding herself through the opening with the careful control of something very large that had learned to move in spaces built for smaller things. One wing was held tight and low, the damaged one, the membrane visibly torn. The leading edge bent at an angle that made Darren's jaw tighten because he had seen enough injuries to know that one had to hurt badly. The other wing was pressed flat against her body. Her eyes found him immediately. 4 of them like her, young but older, the color of deep amber going toward gold. They were not the eyes of an animal running on instinct and hunger. They were measuring eyes, reading eyes, the kind that gathered information and sorted it before deciding anything. She looked at him for a long moment, and he felt, in a way that was not comfortable but was not entirely unwelcome, that he was being thoroughly understood. He did not move, he did not speak. He kept his hands at his sides open, and he kept his gaze slightly to the side of her face, not directly into those amber eyes, but present, not hiding. Red and Gray rushed to her. They made sounds he had not heard from them before, high and rapid and layered over each other, and she answered in a sound so low it moved through the stone of the hollow walls before it reached his ears. She brought her head down to them, and they pressed against her, and the sounds continued for a minute or 2 or 3. He lost track because he was watching still. Still had not moved. The smallest hatchling sat at the back of the nest and watched Darren, not the mother, Darren. He did not know what that meant. He suspected it meant something. The mother raised her head and looked at him again. This look was different from the first one. The first one had been inventory. What are you? Where are you? How dangerous are you? This one was something he could not name precisely. It had depth to it. It lasted a long time, long enough that he began to feel the particular human discomfort of being studied by something that was clearly smarter than a quick threat assessment required. She had seen her young. She had heard them, and they were not afraid, and that was the information she had come in expecting to need most urgently, and it had arrived and told her something she was now processing. Darren did the only thing that felt right. He took one deliberate step to the side, further from the nest, further from the entrance, all the way to the hollow wall, and he stopped there and was still, giving her everything, the path to her young, the whole hollow, no contest, no claim, no position to defend. She watched him do it. Then she lowered her head. Not all the way to the floor, not a prostration or a submission, nothing like that. A deliberate lowering. Her head came down to roughly the level of her shoulder, a movement that for something her size took several seconds and looked careful rather than casual, and she held it there. He raised his right hand, slowly, open palm facing her. He did not touch, he was not insane, he just held it open in the space between them. She exhaled. The sound was vast and warm and moved the air in the hollow like a small wind. It smelled of deep jungle and old blood, and something else he had no reference for, something clean and mineral, like stone after rain. Still climbed down from the nest and walked across the hollow floor and sat down on Darren's foot. He looked down at it. He looked up at the mother. She was watching still with an expression that, if he were forced to translate it into human terms, he would have called something between tired and certain. She turned away from him then, not dismissively, with the finality of something concluded. She folded herself around all three of her young against the back wall of the hollow, tucking them into the curve of her body, and she lowered her great head onto her forearms, and she closed her eyes. She was asleep within minutes, and the depth of that sleep, the immediate totality of it, told him more about how much the last 4 days had cost her than anything Hale's updates had said. He stood at the hollow wall for a while and listened to her breathe. Then he sat down, not at the entrance, where he had been sitting for 6 days, but further along the wall, closer to the entrance but still within the hollow, because leaving felt wrong and not leaving felt right, and he was a scientist who trusted the data in front of him, and the data in front of him was a sleeping Veldrak and 3 hatchlings who were, for the first time since he had found them, making no noise at all. His comm crackled quietly. He pressed the volume low before answering. Hale's voice was strange, careful in a way that was different from his usual carefulness. "We saw," Hale said, "the full feed, all of it." "Good," Darren said quietly. A pause. "The Admiral wants me to tell you that in 400 years of service, he has never seen a Veldrak make that gesture toward a non-native being." Darren looked at the sleeping form of the mother, the 3 small shapes tucked against her warmth. "She was tired," he said. "She just wanted to come home." Another pause from Hale's end. When he spoke again, his voice was even more careful than before, like someone walking on something they were not sure would hold their weight. "Darren Cole," he said, "what made you stay?" Darren thought about it for a moment, because it deserved a real answer rather than a quick one. "They were small," he said, "and they were alone, and they were scared." He was quiet for a second. That was enough. The comm was silent for a long time after that. Outside, the jungle began to make its sounds again. The Union medical team came in the next morning. They did not rush. Sorath had been clear about that. The team would approach only when the mother indicated she was willing to permit it, and the way they would know she was willing was when she did not kill the first person who came within 50 meters of the hollow. This was not a joke, and no one on the team treated it as one. The indication came in an unexpected way. Red walked out of the hollow and sat at the entrance and watched the distant tree line where the medical team was waiting. Hale, observing through the drone feed, reported this to Sorath. Sorath looked at the feed for a long moment and then said, very quietly, "Go." He said it the way someone gives an order when they are not entirely sure they believe what they are seeing, but have decided to trust it anyway. The medical team came in slowly and calmly. The Veldrak mother was awake when they entered. She had been awake for some time, in fact, watching the hollow entrance with the alert patience of something that had made a decision but was monitoring the execution closely. She watched each person who entered. She did not move. When the lead medic, a Durrani named Cell, approached her with the treatment instruments, she held her injured wing out slightly, just enough, an offering or a permission or something between the two. Cell worked quietly and efficiently, and when she was done, she stepped back and bowed her head in the Durrani gesture that translated roughly as acknowledged and grateful. The mother looked at her for a moment. Then she looked at Darren, who was sitting against the far wall watching all of this, and then she looked back at Cell, and then she made a low sound that the translation unit on Cell's wrist rendered, after a delay, as a single word. The word was connected. No one quite knew what to do with that, so they wrote it down carefully and moved on. Darren was extracted from the hollow 3 hours later. He walked out under his own power, which he felt was important, though his legs had some opinions about the idea that he kept to himself. A Union medic met him at the hollow entrance with water and a field nutrition pack and said nothing except, "Come with me," which was exactly the right amount of words. He was taken up to the Sorath's measure on a Union shuttle, which was the first time he had been off the surface in 6 days. When the shuttle cleared the cloud cover and the stars came back, not the strange amber-filtered stars of the jungle but actual stars, clear and cold and numerous, he looked at them for a long time without speaking. The medic on the shuttle did not interrupt. Commander Reaver met him in the shuttle bay. She looked like someone who had spent 4 days managing a survival situation and had done it well, but was not going to pretend it had been comfortable. She looked at him for a moment and then said, "You look terrible." "Thank you," he said. She handed him a proper ration pack, the kind with actual flavor, and stood beside him while he ate it, and they did not say anything else for a while, which was the right call. Admiral Sorath came to find him 2 hours later. Darren had been given a recovery room, small and very clean in the way that Durrani spaces were always clean, everything with a place and a purpose. Nothing decorative, and he had slept for an hour and a half and was sitting up and thinking when Sorath knocked at the door frame and stepped in. Sorath was taller in person than the comm view had suggested. He had the specific gravity of someone very old, not heaviness, but density, the sense that he had been compressing slowly for a long time. He sat in the chair across from Darren's bunk with the care of someone who does not sit carelessly. He looked at Darren for a moment, not the measuring look the mother had given him, something different, something more like the look you give a thing you have been trying to categorize and have not quite found the category for. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Better," Darren said, "hungry, grateful for the shower." Sorath nodded. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to understand that I am asking it seriously and that I have thought about whether to ask it for several hours." "Go ahead," Darren said. "Why did you stay?" Darren had been asked this question twice now, once by Hale on the comm the night before, once implicitly by Reaver's expression in the shuttle bay. He had answered Hale simply. He thought Sorath might need a different version of the answer, or maybe just more of it. "When I found them," he said, "they were frightened. They did not know what I was. They had every reason to expect that what I was going to do was hurt them or take something from them, because that is what large unknown things generally do. And the only way I knew to tell them differently was to stay, not to explain it, not to prove it with some gesture, just to still be there when they woke up in the morning, and the morning after that." He looked at his hands, the scrape on the back of his right hand from the rock wall of the hollow, the callus on the left palm from the makeshift perimeter line he had built and rebuilt 3 times, small records of the time. "I am a xenobiologist," he said. "I have spent 6 years studying how life works in places humans have not been before, and the thing I have learned over and over in every environment and with every kind of creature is that the first question anything asks about anything new is this safe? And the only honest answer to that question is not a gesture. It is time. It is being there, long enough that the question stops needing to be asked." Sorath was quiet for a while. "In 400 years," he said finally, "I have had many conversations about humanity. Your species is young. You have been in contact with the Union for less than 2 centuries. You are what we classify as an emerging species, not yet fully integrated, not yet fully trusted, operating on provisional standing." He paused. "In 400 years, I have heard every argument made about what humans are and what humans are not. What they are capable of and what they should not be allowed near." He looked at Darren steadily. "I'm going to file a recommendation to the Galactic Council," he said. "I'm going to recommend a formal review of humanity's classification status. I'm going to attach the complete drone feed from the hollow, all 6 days." He paused again. "I'm going to write, in my own words, that in 400 years of service, I have seen many species do many things. I have seen species fight with extraordinary courage. I have seen species build with extraordinary skill. I have seen species sacrifice for their own kind in ways that would humble any observer. He stopped. I have never seen a species do what your man did on that moon. Sit in the dark, alone, hungry, afraid, with no obligation and no audience, and stay with something small and frightened because it needed someone to stay. Darren did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. That is not in any of our records, Sorath said quietly, as a behavioral trait, as a cross-species instinct. He looked at the wall for a moment. We had something like it once, my people, a very long time ago. It did not survive the process of becoming what we became. He said the last part without bitterness, just as a fact, the way very old things sometimes state facts that younger things have not yet learned to carry. I think perhaps we became very good at governance and law and protocol, and somewhere in that process, we forgot the other thing. He stood slowly. Rest, he said. Reva's crew will be fully extracted by tomorrow. We will escort your people to the nearest station. He turned to go and stopped. The smallest one, he said, without turning around. The one that sat on your foot. Still, Darren said. Yes, a pause. When our drone scanned the hollow this morning, that one was sleeping in the exact place on the hollow floor where you used to sit. He left. Darren sat for a while in the clean, quiet room with the stars visible through the small porthole, and he thought about a small-scaled creature sleeping in a pressed-down patch of grass, because it was warm there, or familiar there, or because something in its long biological memory was already beginning to record what this had felt like. He hoped it felt like not alone. 3 weeks later, on a station 2 systems away, a Galactic Council communique arrived in Darren's message queue. It was formal and long and written in Union Standard, which he had to read with a translation assist. Most of it was procedural, references to statutes, notes on classification criteria, the language of an organization that had learned to be very careful about what it put in writing. At the very end, past all the formal language, there was a single line that was not standard Union form. It said, humanity's designation under provisional status is hereby elevated pending full review. The Council notes, for the record, that the basis for this action is not a technological advancement, a diplomatic achievement, or a military contribution. The basis is a report filed by Admiral Sorath describing an encounter on Veldra 9 and a 6-day drone record which the Council has reviewed in full. No further summary is considered necessary. Darren read it twice. Then he sent his sister a message. It was not long. It said, "The thing out here is worth the distance. I will tell you about it when I get back." He did not mention the classification review. He did not mention the Council communique or the Admiral's report or the Veldrak or any of it. He would tell her in person when there was time, when he could say it properly. He just said it was worth it. And then he closed the message and looked at the stars and thought about a hollow under a ridge on a jungle moon and 3 small creatures in a nest and what it costs to stay and what it means when you do. Not very much if you are the one doing it. Everything if you are the one being stayed for.